Hello and welcome. I'm hoping that this space will be a fruitful one for people like me, Catholics working in a public or secular school setting. Being a teacher is a profound and unique calling within the Catholic faith. It's a profession and a vocation, and one that allows us to witness to the daily growth of our students. Pope Francis has said, "It is a little like being parents, at least spiritually. It's a great responsibility." In this video, I'm hoping to explore some of the challenges of living out our calling in a secular public school, understanding the limits placed on us by the constitutional separation of church and state. As part of this, I'd like to delve a bit into a notion that's hinted at in the quote from Pope Francis that I just mentioned. When we hear of teachers being like parents, I'm sure some people, like I did, will think of the concept in loco parentis, a term many of us have probably come across at some point in our educational training. However, the concept in loco parentis has experienced a shift in education, and I hope to offer an alternative to this concept as we live out our vocation as teachers. That alternative being in Auxilium Parentum. Next, I'll explore the vocation of the teacher within the teachings of the Church, and then specifically how this vocation relates to teaching in the public school setting. Lastly, I hope in this video to reinforce for you that your vocation as a teacher is vitally important, as you are called to be witnesses to the faith in today's diverse and often secularized society. This witness will likely include the fact that you cannot explicitly teach or perhaps even mention your own personal faith. However, the Church tells us, quote, "It will frequently happen that the presence of lay Catholics in schools is the only way in which the Church is present." However, we hope that even though we must work within the limitations proper to a school that makes no attempt to educate in the faith, in which many factors will actually work directly against faith education, we will still be able to contribute to the beginnings of a dialogue between faith and culture. If you're like me, at some point during your educational training, you heard the phrase in loco parentis, and you came away with some kind of vague notion of what that might mean. The Latin literally means in the parent's place. The concept, which was once pretty literal in its application in schools, has undergone a lot of development over time. Before we discuss, however, teachers acting in the place of parents, we should remind ourselves of what the duty of parents are, especially when it comes to education. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we read that, quote, "Parents have the first responsibility for their education of their children. They bear witness to this responsibility, first, by creating a home where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and disinterested service are the rule." We cannot forget this, that parents are the primary educators of their children. We, professional teachers, are secondary to parents. This teaching of the Church starts to show a bit of the tension between schools, teachers, and families, especially if schools are trying to act in the place of parents. This is why we need to start to shift our context to one of in auxilium parentum, in support of parents. So, in loco parentis. In her article, "Should Schools Be in Loco Parentis? Some Cautionary Thoughts?" Joan Goodman, a professor in the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania, has provided a good look into the history and development of in loco parentis in education. Originally, in loco parentis gave teachers rather extensive authority over children in both moral and academic instruction. This was viewed as necessary because it was believed the survival of the Republic depended on strong moral teaching. Early in our country's history, The courts supported this view, viewing it as analogous to a parent's duty to train children to be useful and virtuous members of society. With the rise of common schools in the 19th century, however, in loco parentis began to receive some pushback. With more and more students being educated in publicly funded schools, the increase in heterogeneity of the population meant, according to Goodman, that families no longer spoke with a single voice, and the seamless alignment with the school was frayed. As time has moved on, courts have increasingly upheld parental rights to direct their children's education, especially throughout the 20th century, as seen in cases like Meyer v. Nebraska and Pierce v. the Society of Sisters, which both affirmed parents' liberty to choose their children's upbringing and education. Of particular interest to us is the case Engel v. Vitale. In this case, the Supreme Court, citing the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, prohibited public schools from giving religious instruction or sponsoring prayer. Working in a public school, then, our Catholic witness is called to be something other than direct evangelization or religious formation, and it's certainly not proselytizing. We also need to recognize that we're not actually in loco parentis. Teachers in today's society cannot attend to the deeply personal, formative education that only parents can provide. Indeed, Goodman recognizes that schools still today grapple with demands to educate the whole child, including character development and mental health, which Goodman notes can encroach on areas traditionally reserved for families and raises questions about the appropriate boundaries of school authority. This is important to keep in mind, although it can get beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. As such, let's now take a look at teaching, not only as a profession, but as a religious vocation as well. The Church teaches that our work as Catholic educators is not merely a profession, but a Catholic teacher's, quote, professionalism is marked by and raised to a supernatural Christian vocation. The life of the Catholic teacher must be marked by the exercise of a personal vocation in the Church, and not simply by the exercise of a profession. What does the Church mean then by vocation? The Church has many teachings about vocations, but some of the things that the Church tells us in particular to the vocations of lay people are that, quote, the laity, by their very vocation, seek the kingdom of God by engaging in temporal affairs and by ordering them according to the plan of God. Pope St. John Paul II tells us that people are called to, quote, the vocation to holiness, that is, the perfection of charity. So, our temporal affairs, those acts of everyday life, should be ordered towards God. And in all actions, we're called to display Christian charity, a love for our neighbors, especially the poor and marginalized. Specific to the teaching vocation, teachers are called to pursue integral human formation. The Church recognizes that the task of the teacher goes well beyond transmission of knowledge. This includes, but is not limited to, the transmission of virtues and values, preparation for professional life, as well as social and ethical awareness. And, as I just mentioned, like all vocations, the educational task is also done out of Christian charity and love. Love is the foundation of the educational mission. For the Catholic teacher, we must strive for our own deep formation and an encounter with God in Christ Jesus. An encounter that, quote, awakens our love and opens our spirits to others, so that our teaching will stem from our faith, a faith which becomes active through love. The love of a teacher needs to extend to every one of our students. And while many of our students can be easy to love, the more difficult the student is, the more we need to love them. Pope Francis tells us that, quote, the duty of a good teacher, all the more for a Christian teacher, is to love his or her more difficult, weaker, more disadvantaged students with greater intensity. Understanding that the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution does not allow us to teach religion or to even be religious in our teaching should not be a problem for the Catholic educator working with children in a secular environment. Indeed, we should embrace this restriction as it is a safeguard for children against their possible coercion. Coercion, even if it is towards something good, like the faith, is never appropriate. Coercion to the faith is proselytism. And as Benedict XVI tells us, quote, the Church does not engage in proselytism. Instead, she grows by attraction. So we need to recognize that the secular school setting is the place where we are called to live out our faith. And our faith recognizes the value of a pluralistic society. This extends to all people in the school setting. So while we're called not to proselytize our students, we must also keep in mind that, quote, living according to one's faith must be joined to careful respect for the ideological convictions and the work of the other educators. We accompany people through their lives, and our life as we live it is the Christian witness. This is the reason why lay Catholics are so necessary in secular institutions. The Church recognizes this, and she tells us, quote, the evangelization of the world involves an encounter with such a wide variety and complexity of different situations that very frequently, in concrete circumstances for most people, only the laity can be effective witnesses of the gospel. As educators, we need to embrace the pluralistic nature of our work. And as effective witnesses to the faith, Catholic teachers must model and teach for attitudes that promote pluralism. Teachers must teach a freedom which includes respect for other, conscientious responsibility, a sincere and constant search for truth, a calm and peaceful critical spirit, a spirit of solidarity with and service toward all other persons, a sensitivity for justice, and a special awareness of being called to be positive agents of change in a society that is undergoing continuous transformation. So, how do we live out this call, this witness to others in this way? First, we must live with integrity. Your conduct speaks louder than words. Strive for coherence between what you say and what you do, as your character and commitment are paramount. John Sullivan, Professor Emeritus of Christian Education at Liverpool Hope University, says, quote, more important than any amount of grandeur or style to those of us who seek to be listened to with obedience is the life of the speaker. Teachers must walk what they talk, and they must live what they espouse. Second, we must commit to ongoing formation. Continuously update your professional, cultural, and spiritual knowledge. Seek religious formation that is on par with your general and professional training. The Church tells us it's not therefore sufficient to achieve solely an initial good level of preparation. Rather, what is required is to maintain it and elevate it in a journey of permanent formation. Third, we must cultivate interiority. Foster a deep inner life. Listen to the voice of God and be open to divine guidance. This internal reflection will illuminate your professional and personal life. John Sullivan again tells us, quote, "The vocation of teaching requires self-knowledge by teachers, just as self-knowledge is at the heart of all real learning with any depth of purchase." He continues to say, "The act of teaching in its highest reaches is an act of spiritual, intercommunicative, and creative power, analogous to the original work of the Creator himself." Practically speaking, what does this look like in our classroom and in our work with students? First, it's personalized accompaniment. We need to build authentic relationships through attentive listening and dialogue. Offer warmth and sincere appreciation to all students, particularly those who are honestly searching for truth. The Church tells us that the Catholic educator should employ a, quote, pedagogy which gives special emphasis to direct personal contact with students. If the teacher undertakes this contact with the conviction that students are already in possession of fundamentally positive values, the relationship will allow for an openness and a dialogue which will facilitate an understanding of the witness to the faith that is revealed through the behavior of the teacher. Next, we must stimulate critical thinking. Encourage students to ask profound questions about the meaning of life, about history. Help them to flee from obvious and trivial things. Guide them to developing their gift for searching and for understanding and meaning. The Church tells us, quote, "When involved in the serious search for truth through the contribution of all the different subjects, the life of the educational community is constantly urged to mature in reflection, to go beyond acquisitions achieved, and to question at the existential level." Lastly, promote virtues and values. Actively foster universal human values, such as freedom, responsibility, solidarity, justice, and a critical spirit. Model these virtues consistently in your interactions and in your classroom environment. The Church tells us that, quote, "The Catholic teacher therefore cannot be content simply to present Christian values as a set of abstract objectives to be admired, even if this is done positively and with imagination. They must be presented as values which generate human attitudes, and these attitudes must be encouraged in the students." As we know, our educational practice affects not just the students in the classroom, but all of the community stakeholders. What does our vocation look like beyond the classroom walls? First, and most importantly, we must engage with families. We must recognize that the parents' primary role is as educators to their children, and we must encourage their involvement. We need to do away with a philosophy of in loco parentis and adopt one of in Auxilium parentum. Recognizing that our true role is to support parents and families in the education of their children requires that we maintain open communication to align educational goals and support families in their crucial task. The Church tells us that it is necessary for parents to cooperate closely with teachers, getting involved in decision-making processes concerning the school community and their children. In this way, parents fulfill their natural educational vocation. Last, be part of the team. Catholic teachers need to collaborate effectively with other educators. allowing your Christian spirit to influence the school's social environment. Get out of your own classroom and help work to ensure that the overall environment of the school is a positive one. The Church tells us lay Catholic educators are also members of the educational community. They influence and are influenced by the social ambiance of the school. Therefore, close relationships should be established with one's colleagues. They should work together as a team. Lastly, foster a culture of dialogue. Within and outside of the school, Catholic educators should actively promote understanding and mutual respect among individuals from diverse cultural and religious backgrounds. Students should be taught to engage this way with one another and with members of the community as well. The Church tells us to, quote, practice the grammar of dialogue as a fundamental way of relating to others. It also tells us education, by its nature, requires both openness to other cultures without the loss of one's own identity, and an acceptance of the other person to avoid the risk of a limited culture closed in on itself. At the heart of all of this is the simple reminder that our role as Catholic teachers in public schools is both challenging and deeply important. We're not here to take the place of parents, but to work in support of them in Auxilium Parentum. We're not called to preach, but instead we're called to live with integrity, to love our students, especially the ones who are hardest to love, and to support families in their primary vocation as educators. The witness we give may not be through explicit words of faith, but through the way we carry ourselves, the respect we show, and the care we bring into our work each day. That is how the Church is made present in places where it might not otherwise be. If we can do that faithfully, then our role as teacher becomes not just a profession, but a vocation. I close with one last quote. The vocation of every Catholic educator includes the work of ongoing social development, to form men and women who will be ready to take their place in society, preparing them in such a way that they will make the kind of social commitment which will enable them to work for the improvement of social structures, making these structures more conformed to the principles of the gospel. I hope that this has been of some help to you in your practice, and I wish you good luck in your classrooms.